I have told this to no one in 50 years, and now that my hands shake too bad to hold a rope, I will tell it to the fire, because the fire is the only thing left that was there. It was the worst winter the high plains ever gave us, and I rode into the worst of it on purpose. I was a fool that way. I had money enough to winter in any warm room from Harlow to the coast, and instead I went out into the teeth of it with nothing but a played-out horse, a borrowed coat with another man's name worn into the collar, and a dog I had no good reason to keep. The dog was the only honest thing I owned that year. I'd found him a week before, dragging a broke trap chain through the snow by a forepaw that had gone to ruin, left to die by some trapper who'd moved his line and not bothered to come back. He was a big raw-boned hound the color of old iron, and he should have bitten me when I knelt to get the trap off him. He didn't. He looked at me out of one good eye and held still and let a stranger hurt him in order to help him, and when it was done, he got up on 3 legs and followed me, and he never once asked who I was or what I had. I called him Drum, for the deep sound he made low in his chest when something came near in the dark. He was the first creature in a long time that wanted me, and not the thing I carried. I had better stop and tell you what I carried, or the rest of this won't land the way it ought to. My name is Gideon Thorne. By that winter I owned the Aldermere outfit on the Wind River Flats and the better part of the grass for 2 days' ride in every direction. I owned the bank that owned the store that owned half the men who tipped their hats to me. I had built it out of nothing with my own back, starting with 40 head and a dugout, and I had been hard about every foot of it, because hard was what it took. And somewhere in the building, I had got it into my head that no soul alive looked at me and saw a man. They saw a purse with boots on. My own foreman had skimmed me for 3 years and called me brother to my face. A woman I'd nearly married had wept very prettily at my table and gone through my strongbox while I slept. By 45 I had everything a man could fence in, and not one thing a man would die for, and I had quit believing such a thing existed. So that winter, when the cattle were laid in and the books were closed, I did a strange thing. I left word I was gone east on business, and I went west instead, alone, in another man's coat, to see if there was a single person in the whole wide territory who would treat a stranger with no money in his pocket like he was worth the trouble. I told myself I was scouting winter range. I was lying. I was looking for something, and I did not have the courage to say its name even to myself. The blizzard caught me on the 3rd day, on the long bench above the cold fork, where the wind comes off the mountains with nothing in front of it for 60 miles. It came on like a wall. One minute I could see the dark line of the creek timber, and the next I could not see Drum at my stirrup. The horse quit. I have seen a lot of weather, and I tell you that horse simply quit, planted his feet and would not face it, and I got down to lead him and lost the reins in the white and lost the horse. And then it was just me and a 3-legged dog in a world the size of a closed fist. I would have died there. I know it the way you know a thing in your bones. I was going down into the snow to sit, which is how it takes you, when Drum got hold of my coat sleeve in his teeth and pulled and let go and barked into the wind and pulled again, hauling me off into the white with his ruined paw, leaving a track of 3 and a drag. I followed because he was the only thing moving with a purpose. We went what felt like a mile and was likely 200 yards, and a yellow square swam up out of the storm, and it was a window with a lamp in it, and under the window was a door, and I fell against the door and I could not even lift my fist to knock. Drum knocked for me. He stood on his hind legs and threw his whole weight against the planks, again and again, and somewhere past my freezing I heard a bolt go back. The light fell out across the snow. A woman stood in it with a shawl thrown over her shoulders and a lamp held high, and a boy half behind her holding a single-shot rifle that was nearly as tall as he was. The light was on her face, and I will tell you what I saw there, because in 50 years I have not stopped seeing it. I saw a woman take one look at a half-dead stranger, and a crippled dog dropped on her doorstep in a killing storm, and I saw the fear go through her, the right and sensible fear of a lone woman with a child and a gun, and I saw her set the fear down. Just set it down the way you'd set down a heavy bucket. She did not ask who I was. She did not ask what I wanted. She handed the boy the lamp and got both her thin arms under mine and said, "Wheeze the dog too, don't you leave that dog." That is the whole of it, really. Everything that came after came out of that. But I have got 50 years of it to tell and a cold night to fill, so I will go on. She got me over her own threshold and onto a rope bed by the stove, and she pulled the wet ruined coat off me and the boots that had froze to my feet, and she did not flinch at the work of it. The dog she laid on a sack by the fire and looked at his paw and made a small sound in her throat, the sound a person makes who knows exactly how much a thing is going to cost and is going to pay it anyway. The cabin was one room and a loft, mud-chinked, clean as a whistle and poor as job. I could see the whole of their life from where I lay shivering, and the whole of their life was a stack of split wood, a row of empty crocks, a Bible, a slate, and a flour sack with not much flour. There was a pot of something thin on the stove. It was a single-person supper stretched to two, and she divided it into 3 and brought me the biggest share in a tin cup because I was the one near to dying. I have eaten at tables that cost more than this woman would see in 10 years of her life, and I have never been served anything like that thin cup of mush. I have not, to this day. When the worst of the shivering passed and I could form words, I said the only thing I could think of, which was, "You don't know me." She was kneeling by the dog, feeding him bits off her own portion. She didn't look up. "I know you're cold," she said. "That's enough knowing for tonight. Theirs men would have left me on the step." "Then I'm glad you came to mine," she said, "and not theirs." I will not pretend I understood it. A hard man does not understand soft things. He has trained himself not to. I lay there and turned it over and could find no angle on it, no hook, no want. She had nothing and she was sharing the nothing, and there was not a thing I had that she had asked for, because she did not know I had anything. It was the first kindness in a decade that I could not explain by greed, and it frightened me worse than the storm had. Her name was Marin Vale. The boy was Wesley, 8 years old, and he was her sister's, not her own. I got the shape of it over the next days, for the storm shut us in 3 full days, and there is no keeping secrets in one room. Her husband had died of a horse 2 springs back. Her sister and the sister's man had died of the fever the winter after within a week of each other and left the boy, and Marin had taken him without a breath of hesitation, though she could barely feed herself, because, she said, "He's mine now. That's all there is to it." She'd proved up the claim alone since, run a few head, put in a garden, and she was losing it. She did not tell me she was losing it. I read it off the empty crocks, and the way she rationed the lamp oil, and the foreclosure notice that I was not meant to see, folded small under the Bible, with the seal of the Harlow Mercantile and Loan stamped on it. I knew the Harlow Mercantile and Loan very well. I owned it. You can imagine what that knowing did to me, lying on her bed in another man's coat. The note was for $210 against the claim and the stock, due at the turn of the year, which was 11 days off. $210. I had carried more than that loose in my saddlebags for the foolishness of the trip, and it was lost now in the snow with the horse, but I could have written her a draft for 10 times the sum and not felt it. And here she was dividing a single supper by 3. The hard thing in me, the thing that had run me for 20 years, said, "There it is then. There's the want. She'll find out who you are and she'll be just like the rest." So I watched her, the way you watch a card you don't trust. I watched her for 3 days to catch her wanting something, and I will tell you what I caught her at instead. I caught her teaching the boy his letters by the dying lamp when she thought I slept, her finger under his on the slate, both of them whispering so as not to wake me. I caught her going out into the storm twice a day to break ice for the 3 head she had left in the lean-to, coming back blue to the wrist, and never once mentioning it. I caught her changing the dog's dressing with strips off her own petticoat, talking to him low the whole while, calling him a brave fellow, a good fellow, telling him he'd run again come spring. I caught her on the second night when the boy cried in the loft from a bad dream, going up the ladder in the dark and singing him down soft and off-key, an old tune about a river, until he slept. And I caught her praying once on her knees by the stove, not for money, not for the note, but only I heard it plain that the stranger by her fire would mend, and that the boy would not be afraid, and that the cold would let up enough to save the calf. That was the whole of her asking of heaven. The cold, the boy, the stranger, the calf. Not herself. Never once herself. On the third night the wind dropped, and in the great ringing silence after, she sat down across from me with the last of the coffee, real coffee, that she had been hoarding for I don't know what occasion and had spent on me, and she said, "You've been studying me like I'm a snake in the woodpile, mister. You can stop. I'm not going to rob you. There's nothing here to rob." It shamed me to the floor. "I know it," I said. "Then why the look? I am not a man who tells the truth easily. I have lied my whole life as a matter of business, but something about the 3 days and the thin cup and the prayer that left herself out of it entirely took the lie out of me. Because I don't understand you," I said. "You're losing this place. I'm not a fool, I've seen the note. You've got nothing put by and a boy to feed and 3 head of cattle and a winter that means to kill them, and you took in a stranger and a broke-down dog and gave us the better part of what you had. I have been all over this country, and I have never once seen a person do a thing like that for nothing. So I keep waiting to find out what it costs me, because everything costs." She was quiet a long moment, turning the cup. The lamp was almost out and her face was mostly shadow. "It doesn't cost you anything," she said. "That's the part you can't get hold of, isn't it? You think kindness is a loan and you're waiting for the bill." She shook her head, not unkind. "My mother used to say that the Lord doesn't keep 2 ledgers, one for what you give and one for what you get. There's just the one book, and it only has the giving in it, and the rest takes care of itself or it doesn't. I gave you the supper because you were hungry, mister. There's no other line to it than that. And if it leaves you short—" "Then I'm short," she said. "I've been short before, I'll be short again, but I won't have it said I watched a man die on my own step to save myself a bowl of mush." She looked at me then, full on. "What kind of a life is that you'd keep by letting a man die at your door? That's no life worth keeping. I'd rather lose the place clean." I had built an empire on the opposite of every word she just said, and I sat there in the dark and could not find one thing wrong with what she'd said. That was the night the thaw started in me, not the snow, the other thing. The storm broke clear and cold the next morning. The sky scrubbed hard and blue, the snow over the windowsills. My horse was gone for good, I knew, but in the daylight I could be of some use, and I was a man who'd rather work than sit. I went out and dug the lean-to clear and broke the ice in the trough proper, and I found the calf she'd prayed over down in the snow and got it up and packed it back to the warm with my own coat around it. And the look she gave me when she saw the calf alive was worth more than the calf, worth more than a great deal. I split a week's wood. I mended the place in the corral where a rail had gone. I worked like a hand because I had been a hand, long ago, before the money, and my hands remembered. And she fought me on every bit of it. "I can't pay you," she said the first morning, watching me swing the axe. Did I ask? "I won't be beholden." "You're not beholden. A man eats, a man works. That's not a debt, that's just Tuesday." I set up another round. "You fed me when I was dying. I'm chopping your wood when I'm not. If you want to call that even, call it even. I won't argue, but I'm not standing in your warm house eating your boy's bread and watching you break ice with your bare hands. I'm not built that way." She didn't have an answer for that, and I saw her decide to let it lie, and I counted it a victory bigger than any deal I'd ever closed. The boy thawed before she did. Children know. By the second day of working, whether Weeze was at my elbow everywhere I went, handing me the wrong tools and asking me the kind of questions a boy asks who's been the only male thing on a hard place too long. Was that a Texas saddle on the horse I lost? Could a man rope a wolf? How many cattle made a herd? I answered him straight, the way I'd have wanted answered at his age, and I taught him to throw a loop over a fence post, and the morning he caught the post clean for the first time he hollered like he'd won the war, and Marin came to the door with flour on her hands and watched her boy and the stranger laughing in the cold, and something crossed her face that she turned away to hide. I saw it, though. I have made my living seeing what people turn away to hide. The dog mended slow. The paw would never be whole, he'd carry it light the rest of his days, the way a man carries an old brake, but the fever went out of it under Marin's nursing, and by the end of that first week Drum was up and limping the cabin on his 3 good legs and the bad one tucked, and he had taken Marin and the boy into whatever a dog keeps in his chest as surely as he'd taken me. He slept across the foot of the boy's loft ladder where he could watch the door. He would not eat until he saw that Marin had eaten. He growled low, that drum sound he was named for, at nothing the rest of us could see, out toward the Harlow Road, the way a dog will when trouble is still a long way off and only he can feel it coming. I should have listened to him. He was right, as he was always right. But I get ahead of myself. I want to tell you about the slate. It was the 4th or 5th night, and the boy was at his letters again, and struggling, and getting that hot, stubborn look a boy gets when a thing won't come and he's ashamed of it. And Marin was patient past all reason, going over it again, her finger steady under his. And I, who had not so much as said a kind word to a child in 20 years, heard myself say, "Let me have a try at him." She looked up surprised. "You read?" "I read, and I cipher better than I read," I said, which was the truth. A man does not build what I built without numbers, and the boy's not stupid, he's just got it crooked. "Come here, Wheeze." And I sat him by me and did not start with the letters at all. I started with cattle. I drew steers on the slate, little horned scratches, and I made him count them, and add to them and take from them, and brand them with their letters. And inside an hour the boy, who could not hold his alphabet, was reading me back the tally and laughing, because it had stopped being letters and started being his. And he'd gone up the ladder. Marin sat a long time looking at the slate, at the little herd of lettered steers I'd left on it. "He's bright," she said, "brighter than his chance. There's no school nearer than Harlow, and Harlow may as well be the moon, and even was it next door I couldn't spare him from the work nor the cost." She wiped the slate clean, slow, like it hurt. "He'll grow up able to read just enough to sign away whatever's left to him, same as his father, same as mine." She set the slate down. "That's the thing eats at me worse than the note, if you want to know. The note's just a place. A bright boy with no chance is a sin, and I'm the one'll have to answer for it." I did not say anything. I could not just then, because I knew, sitting there in another man's coat, that I could change every word she'd just spoken with a stroke of a pen, and I knew that the moment she found out I could, everything between us would turn to the thing I'd come west to escape. She'd see the purse and stop seeing the man, and I found, to my own great surprise, that I had come to need her to see the man. It had crept up on me. It had got all the way up on me before I knew it was there. So I kept my mouth shut, and I kept my name to myself, and I told myself I'd find a way. That was the night I quit being a man hiding from people and started being a man hiding one thing from one person he had come to, I'll say it, it's been 50 years, that he had come to love. There's a difference. The first is a coward. The second is a coward in a worse spot. The 11th day came, the day the note fell due, and it came riding. Drum knew it first. He'd been at the door since dawn with his hackles up and that low drum in his chest, and along about noon 3 riders came up the Harlow Road, and I knew the lead one before he was off the bench. It was a man named Eldred Pace, who ran the mercantile and loaned for me, a thin, cold, careful man who I had hired precisely because he had no mercy in him and would collect what was owed. He had collected a great many things for me over the years, and I had never once asked him how. I had told myself that was business and not my affair. Watching him ride up to Marin Vale's poor door, I understood for the first time in my life exactly what I had been paying him to do, and exactly what I was, and I was sick with it. Marin went out to meet them with her chin up. I started to follow, and she stopped me with one look. "This is mine," the look said. "You don't fight my fights," and the pride in it near broke me. So I stood in the door with the boy's hand creeping into mine and the dog like iron against my leg, and I listened. Pace did not get down. A man like Pace stays up on his horse so as to look down at you. Mrs. Vale, he said, notes due today, $210 or the property reverts. I've a buyer for the bench already, so there's no use asking for time. I'll need you and the boy off by week's end. He glanced past her at the cabin, at me in the door, and his cold eye snagged. He was a man who knew faces, and he very nearly knew mine, and I watched him not place it, the coat and the beard and the last place on earth he expected, throwing him off. "Who's this?" he said. "A hand," Marin said before I could speak. "Passing through. He's no part of this." "You can't pay a hand. You can't pay me." "No," she said, steady as a post. "I can't pay you. I've not got it, and I'll not lie and say I have. But I'll ask you a plain question, Mr. Pace, and you can answer it to your own conscience. Who's the buyer that wants this bench so bad? Because there's nothing here. 3 head and a sod roof. No man buys this for the grass. So who is it, and what do they really want?" I knew the answer. God help me, I knew it in my own gut. The bench commanded the only good crossing on the Cold Fork for 40 miles. Whoever held it held the water for the whole upper valley. I had, 2 years gone, told Pace in a single careless sentence to tidy up the Cold Fork crossing for me, whatever it takes. I had not thought of it since. I had not asked how. And here was the how, sitting cold on a horse in front of a widow and a boy, and the whatever it takes was a forged-up debt and a winter eviction, and the buyer Pace had lined up to flip the crossing to was me. I was the buyer. I had been trying all along, through this cold, thin man, to take this exact woman's home out from under her, and I had been too far up in my money to know her name. I have done a great many things in my life I'd take back. That is the one that wakes me yet. Pace did not answer her question, of course. He just said, "Week's end," and reined around, and that was when I stepped off the porch. I don't fully know what I meant to do. I think I meant to throw the coat off and say my name and end it on the spot. Pace's face be damned. Marin seeing the purse be damned. Just end the wrong of it. But before I got 2 steps, the dog beat me to it. Drum came off the porch like he'd been fired from a gun, 3 legs and all, not at the horses but between them and Marin, and he planted himself in the snow in front of her with every hair up and that drum gone to a roar, and he dared those 3 mounted men to come 1 inch closer to her. It stopped Pace cold. It stopped me cold. A broke-down, crippled hound that a week before couldn't stand, putting himself bodily between trouble and the woman who'd saved him, asking nothing, counting no cost, exactly as she had done for me on the step. I stood in the snow and looked at that dog, and I saw myself in him, the man I'd been and the man I might yet be, and I made up my mind clean, the way you do once or twice in a life. I let Pace ride off. I let him, because I had a better way to end it than a fistfight in the snow, and because there was a thing I had to do first that mattered more than my pride or even than her home. I had to tell her myself, before Pace placed me, before she heard it from any mouth but mine. That night, after the boy was up the ladder and the dog lay across the foot of it watching the door, I sat Marin down at her own table and I told her the whole of it. I told her my name. I told her what Aldermere was and what I owned, and that I owned the very note that Pace had ridden up with, and the store and the bank behind it, and that the buyer who wanted her crossing so bad he'd ruin her to get it was me, and that I had set it all in motion 2 years gone with 1 careless sentence, and never once thought of the people it would land on, because I had stopped thinking of people at all. I did not soften any of it. I had softened things my whole life, called the skimming shrinkage and the evictions tidying up, and I was done. I laid it all on her table the way she'd laid the thin cup in my hands, full measure, the worst part on top. She went very white and very still. The lamp ticked. Drum lifted his head off his paws and looked between us, feeling it. "Get out," she said at last, and her voice shook. "Get out of my house." "Marin, you let me feed you my boy's supper. You let me pray over you on my knees. You sat at this table 11 days and watched me grieve over a note that you wrote, and you said nothing." The tears stood in her eyes and would not fall because she would not let them, and that was worse than if she'd wept. I took you for a man with nothing. I'd have done it the same, I want you to know that. I'd have done every bit of it the same, but you. You came in here to learn whether poor folk would be kind to you like we were a curiosity, like our kindness was a thing you could spend. You played the beggar in my house. There is nothing lower than a rich man who plays the beggar to see if the poor are good. And we were good to you, Gideon Thorne. We were good to you for free, and all the while you were the very wolf at our door. Now the tears came too, and she scrubbed them off fast and hard. Get out. Take your dog. Go back to your half a territory, and leave us our last week in our house. I stood up. Everything in me that was the old hard man said to defend it, to explain, to point out the dog was hers now and not mine, to make a deal. I shut that man up for good. I picked my hat off the peg, and at the door I turned around, because there was one true thing I had to say whether she ever forgave me or not, and a man should say the true thing even when it buys him nothing, especially then. You're right, I said, all of it. I came out here a coward and a wolf, and I learned nothing for 45 years that you taught me in 11 days at no charge. You owe me nothing and I'll go. But hear this once and then I'm gone. The note's torn up. Tonight. I'll wake Pace out of his bed to do it, and there'll be no buyer and no week's end, not from me, not from any man ever. The bench is yours, free and clear, and not as charity and not to buy you off, because it was never honestly mine to take, and I'm only putting back what I had no right to. You'll never see me again and you'll owe me nothing. I just had to be the one to tell you, instead of you finding it in some paper. That's the only decent thing left in me, and your kindness is what put it there. Good night, Mrs. Vale. And I went out into the cold. And the dog, I'll never forget it, the dog got up and limped to the door after me, and then stopped and looked back at the boy's ladder and back at me, torn clean in two. And I knelt down in the doorway and took his iron head in my hands, and I said, "Stay, Drum. You belong here now. You found the warm house. Stay in it." And he understood me, the way that dog understood everything, and he lay back down across the foot of the boy's ladder where he belonged. And I shut the door on the only home I'd ever felt and walked off into the dark on foot, a man worth half a territory, with nothing. I'll spare you the walk to Harlow. It was 11 miles in deep snow, and it nearly finished what the blizzard had started, and there were stretches I'd have lain down if I hadn't had a thing left to do. But I had a thing left to do, and a man can walk a long way on a thing left to do. I got to Harlow Gray with dawn, and I woke Eldred Pace out of his warm bed, and I have never in my life so enjoyed the look on a man's face. I made him put a lamp on, and I dictated, and he wrote, with his hand shaking, the full release of the Vale note, paid in full by Gideon Thorne, and a deed correction returning clear title to Marin Vale, and a separate paper firing Eldred Pace from my employ for cause, the cause being that I had finally troubled myself to learn what I'd been paying him to do. He started to say that he'd only ever done what I told him, and the worst of it, the part that took the last of the starch out of me, was that he was right. I'd been the wolf and he'd only been my teeth. I told him so. Then I told him to be out of the territory by spring, and I went and woke the one decent lawyer in Harlow and made the whole of it iron and legal before I let myself sleep. Then I went home to Aldermere, to my big cold house with its many rooms, and I commenced to be the most miserable rich man on the high plains, and I deserved every hour of it. Here is where the story would end, if it were only about a wolf learning to be sorry. But Marin Vale's mother had it right. There is only the one book, and it only has the giving in it, and the rest takes care of itself or it doesn't. And the giving I'd seen at that woman's fire had got into me and would not be still. I did not go back. I told her she'd never see me again, and I meant to keep at least that one word. But I am a man of means, and a man of means can do a great deal of good from a distance if he's finally got the sense to want to, and that long miserable winter I learned to want to. It started with the boy. I could not stand the thought of that bright boy growing up to sign away his life for want of letters, the sin she'd said she'd answer for, so I did a quiet thing. There was no school in the Upper Valley, so I built one not at the bench, where she'd have known my hand in it and thrown it back, but in Harlow. A proper schoolhouse with a proper teacher I sent for from the East and paid for myself and never put my name on. And I let it be known about the valley that the new school took any child free, no cost, no questions, the founder wishing to stay unknown. And then I bought, through a man she'd never connect to me, the freight contract for the Upper Valley. And I saw to it that the Harlow freighter who happened to pass the bench road twice a week happened to be willing to carry one bright boy to school and home again for nothing, it being on his way. I did it all sideways in the dark, asking no thanks, wanting none, the way she'd fed me without a line to it. For the first time in my life I gave a thing away clean, with no ledger, and I will tell you it was the only money I ever spent that I can't remember the figure of. I remember everything else I ever paid. That I gave so free I lost the count, and that is how I knew it had finally taken in me, the thing she taught me. I thought that would be the end of my part. I truly did. I thought I would be the unknown man who'd built a school and bought a wolf out of his own bank, and I'd grow old at Aldermere alone, a little less of a wolf, and that would be a kind of penance and a kind of enough. But there is the one book, and it only has the giving in it. It was a year later, near onto the next deep winter, and I was out on the Wind River flats moving a bunch off the high grass ahead of the weather, when one of my hands rode up and said there was a woman and a boy and a dog at the home place asking for Mr. Thorne by name, and they'd come a long way and they'd wait. And I knew. Before he finished saying it, I knew, and I put my horse down off that mountain faster than was safe, and I came into my own yard at a dead run like a green boy. And there in front of my big cold house stood Marin Vale in her one good dress, and we's a head taller than I'd left him, and an iron-colored hound who saw me and came across that yard on 3 legs and one tucked, hollering the whole way, and threw himself against my chest and knocked me clean off my feet into the snow. And I sat there in the dirt of my own grand outfit with Drum's whole weight on me and his tongue in my ear, and I looked up at her, and I could not say one word. She could, though. She'd come 100 miles to say it, and she said it. "You built a school," she said. "Aye, that's not." "Don't," she said. "Don't you tell me it wasn't you. I've spent a year being lied to gentle by half the valley about who built that school and who pays that freighter to carry my boy and who tore up a note he had every legal right to keep. A year. And I worked it through, every thread, because I'm not a fool and I had a winter to think, and every thread ran here. To you. To a man who did more good in 1 year hiding his name than he ever did in 20 using it." She came a few steps closer. The boy hung back and the dog stayed sprawled across me, and the whole crew of my outfit had quit pretending to work and stood watching their hard boss flat on his back in the snow. "I came to say 2 things to you, Gideon Thorne, and I'll say them in front of God and your hired men. The first is that I forgive you. It took me a winter, but I do, all of it, free and clear, the same way I'd have given you the supper. There's only the one book." I got up off the ground, my legs were not steady. "And the second," I said. "The second," she said, and now her chin was up the way it had been at Pace's stirrup, the pride of her, the dignity of her, a poor woman standing in a rich man's yard and not 1 inch lower than him for it. "The second is that you were wrong about one thing in all that good you did in the dark. You did it to put back what you took and to make up for being a wolf. You did it sorry, and sorry's a fine start, but it's no place to live." She took a breath. "I didn't come here for the school or the note or to thank you for the freighter. The boy's well, the place is mine, we'd have got on. I came because a year ago a man walked out of my door into the snow rather than buy my forgiveness, and told the truth when a lie was easier and it cost him everything, and he did it anyway, and I have not been able to put that man down. I've tried. He won't go. So I've come to ask you a thing, and you'll answer it plain, the way I asked you plain at this distance once before." And she said, "Did you do all that good in the dark because you were sorry, Gideon, or did you do it because of me? I have closed 1,000 deals. I have stared down bankers and bought out men twice my size and never once felt my voice want to fail. It failed me then. I had to take a breath the size of the whole flats before I could get the truth out, and the truth was the only thing I had left worth giving her, so I gave it to her full measure, the worst part on top, the way she'd taught me. Because of you, I said. Every dollar of it. I told myself it was penance because penance was a thing I could stand to want. But I built that school because you said a bright boy with no chance was a sin you'd have to answer for, and I could not bear you carrying that. I tore up the note because it was your home and you'd prayed in it for everyone in the world but yourself. And I walked out into the snow rather than buy you off because you were the one soul in my whole life who looked at me with nothing in my pockets and saw a man worth saving, and I would have died before I let you find out I'd turned around and tried to take your house, and I would rather have lost you clean and true than kept you by a lie. My own eyes were wet now, and I let them be. I'm a hard man, Marin. I've been hard so long I half don't know how to be anything else. But you put a soft thing in me at your fire 11 days running, and it has grown there a year, against my will in the dark, like a seed under snow, and I cannot get it to stop. I don't want it to stop. I came down off that mountain just now like a boy because for 1 second I let myself believe no. I'll not say it. It's too much to ask of you, and I've no right. Say it, she said, the same 2 words she'd thrown me on the step at the start of all of it. Say it. So I said it. I love you, I said. I have got everything a man can fence in, and you are the only thing on this earth I would die for, and that's the truest thing I have ever spoken, and I'll never speak it again if you say the word, and you'll still have the school and the place and the freighter for the boy forever, no string, because that book only has the giving in it, and I have finally learned to read it. The wind came across the flats. Drum leaned against my leg. The boy behind her had gone still as a fence post. And Marin Vale crossed the last of the snow between us, slow, her eyes never leaving mine, and she stopped close enough that I could see she was not afraid. She had set the fear down. The way she'd set it down in the lamplight a year and a winter ago, and she put her cold hand flat against my chest where the dog had knocked me down, and she said, "Then there's one more line in your book, Gideon Thorne, and you're going to have to learn to read this one too. It's the part where the giving comes back, not because you bought it. You can't buy it, and Lord knows you tried hard enough not to. It comes back because it was real, and real things come home." And she said, "I came 100 miles. Don't make me say it any plainer than that." I didn't make her. I'd learned that much. We were married in the spring, in the little church at Harlow, with the whole Upper Valley packed in to see the unknown man who'd built their school turn out to be the hard old cattle baron from the flats, and to see the proudest poor widow in the county marry him not for 1 acre of his grass, but in spite of every acre of it, which the whole valley understood and approved, because that valley had had its fill of men who married for grass. We stood up with me as my own. The boy who couldn't hold his letters read the scripture at his own aunt's wedding, clear and slow, and I have closed deals worth more than Aldermere, and I have never been prouder of anything than I was of that boy's voice on that day. He grew up to be a lawyer, did we's, the one decent lawyer in Harlow in time, after the old one passed, and there is a justice in that I never tire of. The bright boy got his chance and spent his life seeing other folk got theirs. The sin Marin feared she'd answer for, she never had to. We turned it into the opposite, the 2 of us, over 30 good years. We never moved to the big cold house on the flats. She wouldn't have it, and after a while I wouldn't either. We made my place over into a working home with the doors always open and never enough chairs, and we ran the outfit honest, and I spent the back half of my life giving the money away near as fast as the grass made it, sideways in the dark, asking no thanks, because that was the only spending that ever filled me. There's a school in Harlow yet with no name on it. There's a string of folk all over this country who got a leg up from a man they never met and never will, and that is the only monument I want and the only one I'll get, and it's enough. It's more than enough. It's the one book. Marin went first, 8 winters back, easy and old in our own bed with my hand in hers, and her last clear words to me were not about the place or the boy or the money. She looked at me and she smiled and she said, "You came to my door with nothing, Gideon. Don't you forget you were richest then. And I have not forgotten it. I will not." The boy, the man, the lawyer, gray himself now, comes Sundays and sits with me, and we don't say much. The dog is long gone, of course. Drum lived to be ancient and useless and beloved and died in the sun on the porch with his ruined paw twitching at some last good run. And we buried him up on the bench where it all started, on the veil claim that's still in the family and always will be, under a flat stone with no words, because some things don't need words and a good dog is the chief of them. And me, I sit by the fire and tell it to the coals, because the coals were there. I am the richest man in this part of the country, they tell me, and I let them say it, and I know better. I was richest one night 50-odd years ago, frozen near to death in another man's coat with a crippled dog, when the poorest woman in the valley opened her door and saw a man where everyone else had only ever seen a purse, and divided her one supper into 3, and asked me for nothing in this world but to mend. That's the whole of it. There was never any more to it than that. She gave me the supper because I was hungry. There's no other line to it, and there never needed to be. That's enough knowing for tonight.